Clara May Whitfield hit the dirt before the stagecoach even stopped rolling, her valise bursting open, her whole life spilling across the road, while 40 strangers watched, and not one of them moved. "Tickets unpaid," the driver spat. "Walk." She didn't beg. She gathered her ruined dress and her broken pride from the dust of Silver Hollow, and that was when the coldest cowboy in the high country reined in his horse and looked down at her, like she was already gone. If you love stories where a thrown-away woman becomes the one thing a hard man can't live without, subscribe and stay with me to the very end. And tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from? I want to see how far this story travels. The driver threw her bag down after her, and it split open against a wagon rut, and Clara May Whitfield watched her 2 spare dresses and her mother's sewing kit, and the last folded dollar she owned, scatter into the road, like they belonged to no one. "I paid that ticket in Cheyenne," she said. Her voice did not shake. She made sure of that. "I paid it to a man at the depot window. I have the stub." "Then show it." She reached for her reticule. It wasn't there. It had been there in Laramie. She remembered the weight of it against her wrist when she'd boarded at dawn, half asleep, hungry, counting the hours. "It's gone," she said. "Course it is." The driver climbed back to his bench and gathered the reins. "No stub, no ride. Town's right there, miss. Walk it." "Please." She hated the word the second it left her. "I have employment waiting. There's a letter. Heard that one, too." He was already pulling away. The wheels turned and the dust came up, and the passengers behind the canvas didn't part it to look at her. A child did. A small face pressed to the gap in the cover, watching her the way children watch a thing they've been told not to watch. And then a woman's hand pulled the child back, and the canvas closed, and the coach rolled on toward the next town that would feed it and water it and never know her name. Clara stayed on her knees in the road. Not because she was beaten. Because if she stood too fast, she would fall, and she would not give the men outside the mercantile that. They had gathered the way men do when something free and ugly is happening. 6, 7 of them. Boots on the boardwalk. Thumbs in their belts. One of them laughed low and said something she couldn't hear and didn't want to. She began to gather her things. The dollar first. She found it folded in the mud, and she peeled it up, and she pressed it flat against her thigh, and it was filthy now, but it was $1, and $1 was a meal, or it was a wire home, and home was a place that had already told her not to come back, so it was a meal. "Now there's a sight," one of the men called. "Pretty thing on her knees in the street. Wonder what she done to get put out. Stole most like. Or worse." "Hush, both of you." A third, said a woman's voice sharp from the mercantile porch, but the hush did not come, and the woman did not step down into the road to help her, and Clara understood that the sympathy of Silver Hollow was the kind that stayed up on the boards where it was clean. She found the sewing kit. The tin had dented, but the needles were sound. Her mother had carried that tin through 2 winters and a fever that took everything else, and Clara had carried it through worse, and she folded it back into the valise like she was folding a hand over a heartbeat. "Letter," she said mostly to herself. "There's a letter." She found it last half under the wagon rut, the ink already bleeding where the damp had got it. She smoothed it against her ruined skirt. The hand was square and hard, and unfriendly even on paper. Cook wanted. Mountain Ranch Rourke claim north of Silver Hollow. Crew of 8. Drive leaves midsummer. Wages fair work honest, no foolishness. And beneath the name pressed so hard into the paper, the pen had nearly torn it. C. Rourke. That was when she heard the horse. Not the clatter of a town animal. A mountain horse big through the chest, shod heavy coming down the north road at a walk that did not hurry, and did not slow for the men on the boardwalk, or the woman on her knees in the dirt. The talk on the porch died. That was the first thing she noticed, that the men who'd had so much to say went quiet all at once the way men go quiet when a thing they're a little afraid of rides into the yard. "Rourke," somebody said. Just the name, like a warning or a weather report. Clara got to her feet. She would not be found on her knees by the man whose name was on her letter. She stood, and she swayed, and she locked her knees and did not fall, and she lifted her chin and turned to face the rider coming down on her out of the high country. He was the biggest man she had ever seen sit a horse, and he sat it like he'd been poured into the saddle and left to set. Sun had browned him to the color of the road, dark hair to his collar, a short dark beard, and eyes the pale gray of creek ice that went over the boardwalk. Men once dismissed them, and came down to her and stopped. He didn't get down. He looked at her the way a man looks at weather coming in, not unkind, just reckoning the cost of it. His gaze went over the burst valise and the mud on her skirt, and the dollar still clenched in her fist. And then it went to the letter, and something in his jaw changed barely like a door pulled to, but not latched. "That mine," he said. "If you're C. Rourke." Caleb Rourke. He didn't tip his hat. "You're late. Coach was due Tuesday. There was a delay in Laramie." She held the letter out. He didn't take it. "And then there was a delay just now, as you can see." One of the boardwalk men found his nerve again. "She got thrown off Rourke. Didn't pay her fare. We'd watch that one if I was you." "You ain't me." Caleb didn't even turn his head. He said it flat and quiet, and the man shut up like a slammed window. Then to Clara, still not moving from the saddle. "You the cook?" "Clara May Whitfield." "Yes, I cook, I bake trail bread, I mend. I keep a clean kitchen and a fuller crew than most. I worked the cookhouse at the Drummond Depot 2 years and the Cheyenne boarding house a year before that, and I never once put a sour meal on a man's plate." She was talking too fast. She made herself stop. "I can do the work." "Anybody can say they can do the work." "Then I'll do it and you can say it for me." That landed somewhere. She saw it land. The ice-gray eyes held on her a beat longer than they'd held on anything else in that street. And then he looked away north toward the mountains, the way she'd already learned in 30 seconds that he looked at everything. Like the only true thing was up there, and the rest of the world was just in the way of it. "It's a hard place," he said. "It's a hard crew and a hard summer coming, and the drive's worse than both. Town'll tell you I'm worse than all of it." He didn't say it like a complaint. He said it like a fact a man owns to. "You sure you got no other place to be?" "No." The word came out of her before pride could dress it up. "No, Mr. Rourke, I have no other place to be." He looked at her then. Really looked. And whatever he saw, the mud, the dollar, the chin, she would not let drop. He gave a single short nod, like a man closing a deal he wasn't sure he wanted. "Get your bag." "I..." She glanced at the valise, the thing still half spilled. He swung down then. All at once, easy 6 feet and more of him landing soft in the road, and he crossed to her things before she could stop him and went down on one knee in the same dirt she'd knelt in. And he gathered her spilled dresses in 2 big sun-dark hands and folded them rough. But he folded them and set them in the valise, and he found the dented tin and turned it over once, and then he set it in too careful, like he knew without being told that it mattered. "Mr. Rourke, I can. Rule 1. He stood valise in his fist and looked down at her, and his voice had gone hard again. Hard as the letter. "On my ranch, you don't say I can when somebody's already doing it. You say thank you, and you get to work." She stared at him. "Thank you," she said. "There's a wagon at the Smiths. We load and we ride. It's 3 hours up and I don't make the trail in the dark for anybody." He started toward the smithy with her whole life in one hand. Then he stopped. He didn't turn around. "And Whitfield." "Yes, sir." "One mistake on my ranch, one sour meal, one broke rule, one bit of foolishness, and you're back down this road before sunrise. I don't care where you got no place to be. You understand me." Behind her on the boardwalk, the woman with the sharp voice made a small sound, pity or warning. Clara ignored it. "I understand you," she said. "Then come on." The wagon was old but sound, and he loaded it himself. Flour, salt, pork beans, coffee, a crate of tinned milk, a sack of seed potatoes, coils of rope, a new axe head wrapped in oilcloth, and he loaded it. The way he'd folded her dresses, rough and exact. Nothing wasted. Nothing where it didn't belong. She tried to help with the flour sack, and he took it out of her arms without a word and set it himself. I'm meant to do the work you said. You'll do plenty. Sit. She sat. The town watched them go. She felt the eyes on her back all the way to the edge of it, and then the buildings fell away, and the road tilted up toward the mountains, and the eyes were gone, and it was just the creak of the wagon, and the clop of the horses, and the great silence of the man beside her, who did not say one word for the first hour. She studied him sidelong. The set of his hands on the reins, the way his eyes never stopped moving over the country ahead. Reading it, she realized the way she read a kitchen, knowing where the heat was and where the cold got in. "You'll want to know the rules," he said when the town was an hour behind them. He didn't look at her. "All right. Breakfast at 5. The crew eats before the light. Supper at sundown, not after. A man who misses his meal misses it. You don't hold a plate for stragglers, and you don't waste what they don't eat." A pause, the wheels turning. "Nothing's wasted on my place. Not flour, not water, not daylight. You learn that first, or you don't learn anything." "Yes, sir." "You keep to the kitchen and the garden and the wash. You don't go in the west room, ever. Not to clean it, not to look, not if the roof's coming down on it. The west room's mine." She waited for the reason. None came. "And you don't ask about it," he said, as if he'd heard her not ask. "You don't ask about the room, you don't ask about the town, you don't ask about me. You came here to cook. Cook." The mountains came up around them dark with timber, the air thinning and cooling, even in the summer heat, and Clara May Whitfield folded her hands in her lap and looked at the hard country and the hard man, and thought about how a person learns the shape of a wall by walking the length of it in the dark. "Mr. Rourke," she said, "may I say one thing, and then I won't say another the whole way up?" The reins shifted in his hands. "Say it. I've cooked for hard men in hard places for the worst pay you ever heard of, and I never once needed a rule nailed to a wall to do it right. I do it right because it's mine to do right. So you can keep your rules, and I'll keep my work, and the day my work fails you, you won't have to send me down the mountain. I'll walk." She drew a breath. "That's all. That's the one thing." For a long while he said nothing, and the wagon climbed, and she thought she'd ruined it before she'd begun. Then, "Drummond Depot," he said. "You said 2 years." 2 years. "Old man Drummond's a worse devil than I am, and his cook fires run hot, and his crews run rough. They don't keep a cook there, couldn't hold her own." He flicked the reins. "Maybe you'll do." It was not kindness, but it was the closest thing to it she'd heard in a week, and she took it, and she held her tongue the rest of the way up the mountain like she'd promised. The ranch sat in a high bowl of meadow with the timber rising black behind it, and a creek running cold along the east fence, and the house was a long, low thing of squared logs, and there was not one flower near it, not one curtain in the windows, not one soft thing she could see anywhere in the whole hard, handsome place. The crew was in the yard when they pulled up 6 men and a boy drifting in from the day's work, and they stopped what they were doing and looked at her the way the town had looked. Only different, because these were the men she'd be feeding. And a cook is the nearest thing to a mother. A trail crew gets, and they all knew it, even if they'd never say it. An old man stepped forward first, bowed legs, white whiskers, a hat. He actually did tip the only man yet to do it. "Ma'am, name's Asa. I've been doing the cooking when there weren't none, and let me tell you, ma'am, these boys are real glad to see you on account of I burn water." A few of the men laughed. "You need the lay of the kitchen, you find me." "Thank you, Asa." She nearly wept at it, the simple decency of a tipped hat, after the day she'd had, and she didn't, because Rourke was watching, and she would not. "Boys," Caleb's voice cut the yard. They straightened. "This is Whitfield. She cooks. You'll mind her like you'd mind me about her kitchen. Anybody gives her trouble answers to me, that's all." It was nothing. It was 4 sentences, but she heard the thing under it. "Anybody gives her trouble, answers to me," and so did the crew, and a young hand near the back, sharp-faced, looked at her a beat too long, and didn't say whatever he'd been about to say. "That's Tom Vay," Asa murmured to her low as the crew broke up. "Came on this spring. Watch him. Watches you." Then louder, friendly, "Come on, ma'am. I'll show you where the flour don't get damp." She cooked her first supper that night. She did it on a strange stove with strange wood and a crew of strange men an hour from sundown, and she did it without one mistake, because she could not afford one. Salt pork and beans she'd doctored with the last of her own dried sage from Cheyenne. Biscuits that rose. Coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. She put it on the long table in the cookhouse, and she stood back against the wall the way a cook does, and she watched 8 hungry men go silent over a plate, which is the only true praise a cook ever needs. Caleb ate at the head of the table. He didn't say a word. He cleaned his plate, all of it, the way he did everything. Nothing wasted. And he set his fork down, and he looked down the length of the table at the men who were already going back for seconds, and then he looked at her against the wall, and he did not nod, and he did not smile, and he did not say that was good. He said, "Supper's at sundown. You held it 4 minutes." The table went quiet. "The crew was still in from the south fence," Clara said. "I held it so the food'd be hot when they sat. Cold beans feed nobody, Mr. Rourke. The rule's sundown, and the rule's right most nights." She didn't drop her eyes. "Tonight your men ate hot. You can dock my wage 4 minutes if you've a mind to, but I'll hold a hot supper for a crew that worked a fence line in the heat every single time, and I'll do it knowing the price. And that's the difference between breaking your rule and ignoring it." Somewhere down the table, old Asa let out a low whistle through his whiskers. Caleb Rourke looked at her for a long, long moment. The whole cookhouse held its breath. And then he stood and picked up his hat off the bench and settled it on his head, and at the door he stopped his back to her and said the thing she would turn over in her mind 100 times that first sleepless night in the cold little room off the kitchen. "5 o'clock, he said. "Don't be late." And he walked out into the dark, and the door shut behind him, and old Asa leaned over and patted her hand with his whiskery old grin, and said, "Ma'am, in 3 years I ain't once seen that man walk away from a fight he was winning. You hold on to that." The days set into a shape after that, the way days do. She was up before the dark every morning, the stove lit, the coffee going, the smell of it pulling the men out of the bunkhouse one by one with their suspenders down and their hair every which way. And she fed them, and they went out to the work, and she did the wash and tended the sorry little garden some other woman must have planted years ago and let go, and she pulled the weeds out of it and didn't ask whose hands had set it. And Caleb Rourke never praised her. Not once. Not the bread, not the mending, not the way the cookhouse came alive with the men joking again, the way Asa said it hadn't in 2 years. But she came out one cold morning to find the wood box by the stove filled high split, small the way it burned best, and she had not filled it, and Asa swore he had not, and the only man up before her was the one who rode out before light. Her chair, the cane bottom one at the kitchen work table that had a busted rung she'd been meaning to see to. She came in one noon, and the rung was mended tight and clean, a fresh whittled peg holding it, and nobody said a word. Her good knife went dull from the work, and she set it by to hone it. And the next morning, it was honed better than she could do it, an edge on it you could shave with, and the water. The creek ran cold and close, and there was no earthly reason for a man to ride 2 miles up to the high spring for sweeter water. And yet the kitchen barrel kept filling with water that tasted of snow and stone, and nothing of the creek mud. And she knew, and she said nothing, because he'd said, "Don't ask." And she was learning the shape of him, the way she'd learned the shape of the wall, by walking it in the dark handout, feeling for the place where it gave. The town gossip reached her anyway. It came up the mountain in the mouths of the men who rode down for supplies. That the new Rourke cook was a fallen woman, a thief, a schemer chasing a lonely rancher's land. That Caleb Rourke had buried better women than her up on that mountain. That mean little Silas Vane who ran the big spread in the valley and wanted Rourke's claim because the only safe summer pass ran straight through it, had been heard to say at the Silver Hollow Saloon that the Rourke place would be his by fall, cook and all, and laughed when he said it. She didn't carry any of it to Caleb. She didn't have to. She watched it land on him from a distance, the way she'd learned to watch everything about him. From a distance saw his jaw set harder. The weak Vane's hired men were spotted riding his fence line. Saw him clean his rifle at the cookhouse table one night, without one word, and then put it up and go out into the dark toward the west room. The room that was his. The room she did not enter and did not ask about. but she understood it now. Some of it. She'd been on the place 3 weeks the night she finally understood the first true thing about Caleb Rourke, and it wasn't from anything he said. It was Asa. The old man stayed late by the stove one night after the others had bunked warming his bad hands, and Clara was kneading the next day's bread, and out of the long companionable quiet, he said soft, "You wonder about him. I see you wonder." "I don't ask," she said. "He told me not to ask." "You don't ask him. I ain't him." Asa turned his hands over in the heat. He had a sister. Younger. Sweet little thing Ruth her name was. Their folks went in the bad winter of '74, and Caleb raised her up himself, weren't but a boy doing it, and he raised her good. The old man's voice had gone careful the way a man's voice goes over a thing that still cuts. Summer of '79 he run a herd over the high pass, the dangerous one, the one they don't run in a dry year. Ruth wanted to ride along. He let her. Said yes when he should have said no on account of he could never tell that girl no. Clara's hands had gone still in the dough. Crossing went bad, Asa said. Ground gave it the wash. He got the herd. He didn't get Ruth. The fire popped. Buried her up on the rise behind the house where you can see the pass from the headstone. And the next spring he started nailing them rules to the wall. One a year near about. Supper at sundown. Nothing wasted. Don't run the high pass dry. Stay out the west room. Asa looked at her, then his old eyes wet and steady. That room was hers, ma'am. He keeps it just so. Don't a soul go in but him. The bread sat forgotten under Clara's hands. Every rule that man owns. Asa said, getting up slow on his bad legs. He wrote in her name. So when he tells you one mistake and you're gone, he ain't being cruel, ma'am. He's being scared. There's a difference, and you're maybe the first one come up this mountain smart enough to see it. He shuffled to the door and stopped and tipped his hat to her the way he had the first day. Get some sleep, he said. 5 o'clock comes hard. And then she was alone in the warm kitchen with the cold rules nailed to the wall, and she understood at last that they were not walls at all. They were the bars of a cage a grieving man had built around himself. One rule at a time, and locked from the inside, and thrown away the key, and somewhere out past the dark window, 2 miles up at the high spring, that same man was filling her water barrel with sweet cold water in the middle of the night, because it was the only way he had left in the whole world to say a kind thing to a living person without having to risk the saying of it out loud. Clara May Whitfield looked at the rules on the wall a long time. Then she covered the bread to rise and banked the fire down to coals and turned the lamp low. At the door of her cold little room she stopped and looked back at the kitchen, and she said it out loud to the empty dark quiet, like a promise made to nobody or to herself, or to a girl named Ruth she would never meet. I'm not going anywhere, Caleb Rourke, she said. Not down that mountain and not out of this kitchen. You can nail up all the rules you want. And she blew out the lamp. The bread was barely out of the oven the next morning when the trouble started, and it started with Tom Vay. He came in last to breakfast, which was a thing he'd never done, and he sat down at the foot of the table, where the light didn't reach, and he watched Clara move between the stove and the men with his sharp face still and his hands too quiet. And when she set his plate in front of him, he said loud enough for the whole table to hear, "Heard a interesting thing in town, Whitfield." The men went still over their food. "Eat your breakfast, Mr. Vay," Clara said. "Heard you was run out of Cheyenne for stealing." He smiled when he said it. "Heard you took a man's whole month's wages out his coat, and they couldn't prove it, so they just put you on a coach and told you don't come back. That true?" She didn't drop the spoon. She'd learned a long time ago that the dropping of the spoon was what they wanted. "No," she said, "it isn't." "Asa says different. Asa says no such thing," the old man cut in from down the table. "And you leave off, Tom. You ain't been here 3 months, and you're already—" "I'm asking the cook a question." Vay leaned back. "Seeing as how she's got the keepin' of all our food and the salt and the coffee and everything a man could slip something into. I figure a crew's got a right to know if the woman feedin' him is a thief." And that was when the door opened. Nobody had heard the horse. Nobody ever heard Caleb's horse until he wanted them to. He stood in the doorway with the cold morning at his back, and his hat low, and he had heard enough of it. They all knew he had, and the cookhouse went so quiet, Clara could hear the coffee going on the stove behind her. "Vay," Caleb said. "Mornin', boss. You was just leavin' my table." Caleb came in slow. "Get your horse. Ride the north fence, the whole of it. You'll find 3 breaks where Vane's men cut the wire last night, and you'll mend all 3, and you won't come back to this cookhouse till they're mended if it takes you past dark and into your own time." Vay's face went ugly. "It's a 2-man job, the north fence. It's a 1-man job for a man who keeps his mouth off my cook." Caleb didn't raise his voice. He never raised his voice. That was the terrible thing about him. Clara was learning the worst of him, came out quiet. "You got something to say about Whitfield, you say it to me. Not to her, and not to my crew at my table over food. She got up at 4 o'clock to make you. You understand me, Tom?" The whole room waited. "Yes, sir," Vay said. "Then go." And Vay went, and the door shut, and the men breathed again, and Clara stood at the stove with her back to all of them so they wouldn't see her face, and she poured a cup of coffee she didn't need just to have something to do with her hands. Caleb sat down at the head of the table. "Whitfield." "Yes, sir." "That coffee for anybody or you keepin' it?" She brought it to him. She set it down in front of him, and she meant to step away, and he said low just for her, not for the table, "It ain't true, what he said." It wasn't a question, but she answered it anyway. "No, sir, it isn't." "I know it ain't." He wrapped his big hands around the cup. "A thief don't fold a man's spare dollar flat and clean it off and put it away, careful when she thinks nobody's lookin'. I seen you do that in the road in town. Thieves don't treat a dollar like that. They treat it like it's already spent." He drank his coffee. "Sit down and eat something. You've been feeding 8 men 3 weeks and I ain't once seen you take a plate for yourself." It was the longest string of words he'd ever given her, and there was a thing buried inside it she didn't know how to hold, so she did the only thing she knew how to do, which was the work. "I'll eat when the crew's fed Mr. Rourke," she said. "That's the rule of a cookhouse, and I made that one myself, long before I ever read yours off your wall." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't a smile. Caleb Rourke didn't smile. But it was the place where a smile would have gone in another man, and she saw it, and she carried it with her the rest of that long day. It was the last good moment for a while, because the drought came on hard that week, the way the high country drought comes not slow, but all at once like the mountain decided. The creek that had run cold and full along the east fence dropped a foot in 3 days, and then another foot in 2, and the meadow grass that had been knee-high went pale and brittle, and the cattle started bawling at the dry troughs, and Caleb stopped sleeping. She knew because she was up at 4, and his light was always on by then in the west room, the room that was Ruth's, and sometimes she heard him in the yard at 2 and 3 in the morning, walking the fence line in the dark, with a lantern, like a man can argue a creek into running. "He's countin' days." Asa told her low-splitting wood she'd asked for, and he gave, even though his hands hurt. "The grass won't hold past midsummer in a dry year. The cattle got to go over the pass to the high meadows and the railhead at Granby, or they die where they stand. And the pass—" The old man stopped splitting. "The pass is the one killed his sister, ma'am. He's got to run his whole herd and his whole crew over the very ground that took Ruth, and he's got to do it inside 3 weeks, or he loses the ranch. Vane knows it. Vane's been waiting on this drought like a buzzard waits on a sick calf." "Then we run the pass," Clara said. "What's the trouble in that men run dangerous trails every summer?" "The trouble, ma'am," Asa said, "is that the last time that man ran that pass, he buried the only person in the world he ever loved at the end of it. And now you want him to do it again, with 8 more lives on his hands, and a drought pushin' from behind, and Silas Vane pushin' from the front. That's the trouble." He set down the axe. "You watch him close these next weeks. A man can carry just about anything, but a man can carry the same grief twice, and the second time's the one that breaks him." Clara watched him close. She watched him at supper that night not eat which she'd never seen, and she said nothing. She watched him stand in the cookhouse door, staring north at the dark mountains where the pass was, and she said nothing. And then, on the fourth dry day, she did a thing she'd promised herself she wouldn't do. She set a plate aside, a good plate, the best of the supper. And when the crew had bunked, and the kitchen was dark, and his light was burning in the west room, she carried it across the yard with a lantern, and she stood outside the door of the room she was forbidden to enter, and she knocked. For a long time, nothing. Then his voice rough from inside. "What?" "It's Whitfield. You didn't eat." "I ain't hungry." "That's not the same as you don't need to." She held the plate. She didn't open the door. She wouldn't. "I'm not coming in, Mr. Rourke. I know the rule. I'm setting your supper down right here outside the door, and I'm going back to my kitchen, and what you do with it after that is your business. But a man can't argue a creek into running on an empty stomach, and you've got harder days coming than this one, and I won't watch you go into them hollow." Silence. She set the plate down on the boards by the door. She picked up her lantern, and she had turned to go when the door opened behind her. She didn't turn around. She'd promised herself she wouldn't look in, but she felt him there in the doorway, big and tired and unsleeping, and for a moment neither of them moved, and behind him she could feel rather than see the room. Small, careful. A girl's room kept like a held breath, and she kept her eyes on the dark yard and waited. "You know about Ruth," he said. It wasn't a question either. "Asa told me. I didn't ask him. He told me on his own." She kept looking at the yard. "I'm sorry, Mr. Rourke, about your sister. I won't say another word about her, and I won't ever go in that room. But I'll bring you your supper every night you don't come eat it, because that's the one rule I've got that's older and harder than any of yours, and it's this: nobody under my care goes hungry. Not a crew of 8, and not the man who hired me. That's all." She heard him pick up the plate. "Whitfield." "Yes, sir." "Go to bed. 5 o'clock comes hard." But his voice had changed when he said it. The hardness had a crack in it she'd never heard before, thin as creek ice in spring, and she carried that crack back across the yard with her. And she lay awake a long time turning it over, wondering what it would take to break the rest of it, and whether she had the right. She found out 2 days later, and it wasn't the way she'd have chosen. It was a Sunday, and the crew had the half-day, and a wagon came up the mountain road that nobody expected, and it was Silas Vane. Clara had never seen him, but she knew him the second he climbed down, a soft, heavy man in a good coat, with small eyes, and a smile he kept on his face, like a man keeps a dog on a chain, ready to let off it the moment it suited him. He had 2 riders with him, hard ones who stayed mounted. And Caleb came out of the barn wiping his hands, and stopped in the middle of the yard, and did not offer his hand. "Rourke." Vane spread his soft hands. "Don't look at me like that. I come up neighborly." "You ain't neighborly, Vane. You never been neighborly a day in your life. Say what you come to say and get off my land." "It's about the land I come that's true." Vane's small eyes drifted past Caleb and found Clara on the cookhouse porch, and the smile widened, and Clara felt it land on her like a hand she didn't ask for. "And it's about your help, I see. This the famous cook, the Cheyenne woman, my. They didn't say she was handsome." "You look at her again," Caleb said, very quiet, "and you'll ride down this mountain with one less eye to look with." The riders' hands moved toward their saddle guns. Caleb didn't even look at them. "Easy." Vane laughed, but it came out thin. "Easy now, neighbor. I come to do you a kindness, and you go threatenin' my eyes. The drought's killin' your grass, Rourke. Everybody from here to Granby knows it. You got 3 weeks, maybe less, before that herd starts droppin', and the only way to the high meadows is over the pass, and we both know how you feel about the pass." The small eyes glittered. "So I'm making you an offer one last time. I buy the claim. Top dollar. You take the money, and you take your crew, and your—" The eyes flicked to Clara again. "Your cook. And you go start somewhere. A man don't have to ride past his sister's grave to save his cattle. Clean, easy. No more pass, no more drought, no more ghosts." The yard had gone dead quiet, and Clara watched Caleb Rourke's face, and she saw the offer land, and she saw God help her. She saw it a flicker of something that was almost relief. Because it was an out. It was the one out a grieving man would crawl toward in the dark. Take the money. Never run the pass. Never stand at that wash again where the ground gave way. She saw Vane's offer reach into the very center of Caleb's grief and take hold of it and pull. And she saw him sway toward it just for a heartbeat. Just for one terrible heartbeat. He's not selling, Clara said. Every head in the yard turned. Whitfield, Caleb said. Low, a warning. He's not selling, Mr. Vane. She came down off the porch. She didn't know what she was doing. She knew exactly what she was doing. Because a man who built his whole life out of rules about not wasting things doesn't waste the one thing his sister died helping him hold on to. You think you're offering him an out. You're offering him a way to throw her death away for nothing. She stopped at Caleb's shoulder. He's not selling, and you can take your money and your riders and your kindness back down that road, and the next time you cut his fences in the night, you can know the cook saw your wagon ruts in the mud by the north break this morning, and she knows it was your men, and so does the sheriff in Silver Hollow, because I'll be the one tells him. Mushy. The silence after that was the loudest thing she'd ever heard. Vane's smile was gone. The dog was off the chain. You want to be careful, Missy, he said soft. Real careful. Folks who get between me and what's mine got a way of... That's enough. Caleb stepped in front of her. Just stepped the way a wall steps. You heard the woman. I ain't sellin'. I never was sellin'. Now get on your wagon, Vane, and take your $2 a day men with you, and don't you come up this road again, because the next time you do, I won't come out wiping my hands. I'll come out with the rifle. We clear. Vane looked at him a long moment. Then he climbed up onto his wagon slow and heavy, and he gathered the reins, and at the last he looked back, not at Caleb, at Clara. You made a mistake today, woman, he said. Pickin' a side, you'll see. And he turned the wagon and went down the mountain, the two riders trailing, and the dust hung in the dry air a long time after they were gone. Caleb didn't move. He stood in the middle of the yard with his back to her, and his shoulders were rigid, and Clara's heart was still going like a hammer, and the crew was watching from the bunkhouse porch, and she didn't know what she'd done, whether she'd saved him or stepped so far over the line he'd send her down the mountain at last. Mr. Rourke, she started, you spoke for me. He still didn't turn around. In my own yard, to my own enemy, about my own sister. Each word came out flat and hard. I didn't ask you to do that. I told you not to ask about her, not to speak about her, and you stood in my yard and you... I know. Her voice shook now that it was over. I know I did, and you can put me down the road for it. Mr. Rourke, you'd be in your rights. But I watched you sway toward his money, and I couldn't. I couldn't stand here and let you sell the thing she died for, just to never have to feel that grief again. I couldn't. A person's worth more than the easy way out of hurting. Even your worst day. Even your sister's death. It's worth more than Silas Vane's clean, easy money. So, no, I'm not sorry. Send me down the mountain, but I'm not sorry. He turned around. And his face, she'd never seen it. Not once in 3 weeks. The hardness was gone clean off it, all of it, and what was underneath was so raw and so young and so unbearably tired that she had to keep herself from reaching for him. You think I was gonna sell, he said. I saw you. I wasn't gonna sell Clara. It was the first time he'd ever used her name, and it stopped the breath in her chest. I was remembering, that's all. When he said run the pass, I was standing at that wash again, 5 years ago, with my hand out and the ground gone, and Ruth... His voice broke clean in half, and he stopped, and he turned his face north toward the mountains and the grave on the rise, and when he spoke again, it was barely sound at all. I weren't swaying toward his money. I was swaying toward being a coward. And you put your hand on my shoulder, and you called me a man worth more'n that in front of my whole crew, and... He stopped. He couldn't finish it. Caleb! Don't. He held up a hand. Not angry. Drowning. Don't be kind to me right now. I can't. I've been hard so long, Clara. I don't know how to take a kind thing without it taking something out of me. He drew a breath that shook. Just go cook supper, please. I just need... I need the supper bell to ring at sundown like it always does. I need one thing in the world to stay the same. Can you do that for me? Can you just make it ordinary?" And Clara May Whitfield understood that she'd just seen all the way to the bottom of him, and that he knew it, and that it terrified him more than Vane and the drought and the pass all together. "Supper's at sundown, Mr. Rourke," she said gently. "Same as it ever was. I'll ring the bell." He nodded. He couldn't speak. He walked toward the barn, and partway there he stopped, and without turning, he said rough, "Thank you, for not letting me be a coward. I'll—" A long pause. "I'll remember it." And he went into the barn, and Clara stood alone in the dusty yard, with her heart wide open, and the crew watching from the porch, and old Asa came down off it slow on his bad legs and stood beside her, looking at the barn door. "31 years I knowed that man, ma'am," Asa said quietly. "Knowed him since he was a boy, and I never once heard him say thank you for nothin'." He tipped his hat. "You best go ring that bell, but I'll tell you something for free. Whatever you're doing up here, keep doing it. That man's been dead inside since '79, and just now, out in that yard." The old man's eyes were wet. "That was the first I seen him alive." She rang the bell at sundown. The crew came in and ate, and it was ordinary the way he'd asked, and he sat at the head of the table and cleaned his plate, and nobody spoke of Vane, and the only thing different in the whole world was that twice during the meal she looked up and found him watching her. Not the way Tom Vay watched her, not like a thing to be suspicious of, but the way a man watches the one window with a light in it when he's been a long time lost in the dark. It should have been a good night. It was the first night she'd let herself believe she might really have a place here, a real place, not just hired and tolerated, but wanted, which is exactly when it all went wrong. Tom Vay didn't come in for supper. She noticed it at the table, the empty seat at the foot where the light didn't reach, and she thought he was sulking over the morning, and she set his plate aside, out of habit, the way she set Caleb's. But the crew bunked, and Asa banked the fire, and the ranch went dark and quiet. And still Vay didn't come. And along about 10 o'clock, Clara was alone in the kitchen, covering the morning's bread, to rise when she heard it. A horse. Coming up the mountain road. Fast in the dark, which no sane man did on that trail. She went to the window. A single rider hard against the moon, and he wasn't coming to the house. He cut off toward the corral where the supply wagon stood loaded for the drive, the wagon Caleb had spent 2 days packing for the crossing, and the rider swung down and went to the wagon and bent over the rear axle in the dark, with something in his hand, working fast, and Clara's heart climbed into her throat, because she knew that walk. She knew that sharp-shouldered shape even at a distance, even in the dark. It was Tom Vay, and he wasn't loading the wagon. He was doing something to it. She didn't think. She took the lantern, and she went out the kitchen door into the dark yard. Quiet, her heart slamming. And she crossed half the distance to the corral before he heard her and spun, and the lantern light caught his face, and it caught the thing in his hand. A wrench, and the bright fresh metal of the wagon's brake rod hanging loose where he'd loosened it, and it caught on the ground at his feet, the dull gleam of an open tin, and the wet dark stain spreading where he'd poured something into the open water barrel, lashed to the wagon's side. For one long frozen second, neither of them moved. "Whitfield," Tom Vay said softly, and he wasn't sharp now. He wasn't sulking. Now he was something else entirely, something cold, and he took a step toward her with the wrench still in his hand. "You shouldn't have come out here, ma'am. You really shouldn't have. You shouldn't have come out here," he said again, and he took another step, and Clara took one back, and the lantern shook in her hand and threw his shadow long and wrong across the corral dirt. "You poisoned the water," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "And the brake rod. You loosened the brake rod. I done a job." Vay turned the wrench over in his hand. Slow, almost lazy, but his eyes weren't lazy. His eyes were measuring the distance between them. "That's all. A job I'm getting paid real good for. You think Vane pays a man $2 a day to mend fence? He pays better'n that, ma'am, for the right work." He smiled, and it was an awful thing in the lantern light. "Crew runs the pass at dawn day after tomorrow. Wagon hits the first hard grade break, gives wagon rolls. And anybody drinks from that barrel along the way, well, they won't be feeling too good by the time they get to the wash. Won't be feeling much of anything. He took another step. It was supposed to look like the mountain done it. The drought. Bad luck. Same as it done his sister. Real clean. And now here you are holding a lantern looking right at it. Clara's mind ran fast and cold. The wrench? The dark? The 200 yards of yard between her and the house. The fact that no one knew she was out here. The fact that if she screamed, he was close enough to reach her before the scream finished. Vane sent you up the very night he made his offer, she said, keeping her voice level, keeping him talking, edging her weight back toward the house an inch at a time. So if Caleb said no, and Caleb said no, the herd dies on the pass anyway. He gets the ranch cheap off a ruined man. Or off a dead one. You're a smart woman. Vay's smile dropped clean off. Too smart. That's your trouble. Asa's old and soft, and he don't see nothing. The crew don't see nothing. But you been watching this whole place since the day you got here. Watching him, watching me. The wrench came up. Should have kept to your kitchen, Whitfield. He moved. She threw the lantern. She didn't aim it at him. She aimed it at the dry brush piled against the corral rail, the tinder dry summer brush, and it shattered, and the oil caught, and the flame went up in a sheet between them, sudden and bright, and Vay threw an arm across his face and stumbled back from it swearing. And in that half-second, Clara turned and ran. She ran for the house, screaming, screaming, the way she hadn't let herself scream the day they threw her in the road, screaming Caleb's name into the dark, and behind her she heard Vay's boots. And then she heard him stop because the fire was loose. Now the fire was running up the dry corral rail toward the loaded wagon, toward the barrels of powder and the coils of rope, and 2 days of trail supplies. And Vay had a choice to make. And he made it. He ran for his horse instead of for her, because a dead cook was worth $2, but a man caught at the burning of Caleb Rourke's wagon was worth a hanging. The cookhouse door banged open. Caleb came out of it half-dressed with the rifle in his hands and Asa behind him and the crew spilling out of the bunkhouse, and Caleb took in the whole of it in one sweep. The fire, the wagon, Clara running at him, white-faced, and he didn't ask one question. "Buckets!" he roared. "The creek's low, but it's wet. Asa the wagon, get the powder off the wagon. Hutch Daniel the corral, rail beat it out before it takes the barn. Move." And they moved. The whole crew moved, and Caleb shoved the rifle into Asa's hands and ran straight at the fire, and Clara grabbed his arm. "Caleb, the water barrel on the wagon, don't let anyone drink from it. It's poisoned. Caleb Vay poisoned it and the brake." "What?" He'd stopped dead. Her hand on his arm, the fire roaring 20 feet away. "Tom Vay. He's working for Vane. He poisoned the trail water, and he loosened the wagon brake so it'd fail on the grade. I caught him doing it. That's how the fire started. I threw the lantern to get away from him. He's running Caleb. He's at the horses." And Caleb Rourke turned and looked toward the corral horses, and saw just for an instant the sharp-shouldered shape of Tom Vay hauling himself into the saddle, and Caleb's whole body went still and terrible. "Asa," he said, never taking his eyes off Vay. "The wagon. Get the powder clear. Clara, you help him." He took the rifle back out of the old man's hands. "Caleb, don't." Clara grabbed for him again. "Don't go after him in the dark. The fire the crew needs." "He tried to kill my whole crew." Caleb's voice was the quietest she'd ever heard it. "He tried to kill you." And he started walking toward the horses, levering around into the rifle. And Clara saw the next 10 years of his life in that moment, saw him chase Vay down a black mountain trail and shoot him out of the saddle and become a man who'd killed, saw the law come up the mountain, saw Vane twist it, so that grieving Caleb Rourke hanged for the murder of a hired hand, and Vane took the ranch off the gallows steps. She saw all of it in one breath, and she did the only thing she could. She stepped in front of him. "No," she said. "Clara, get out of my—" "No, listen to me. Listen." She put both hands flat on his chest, and she felt his heart going like a war drum under them. That's what he wants. That's what Vane wants. You ride off this mountain in the dark and shoot Tom Vay, and you're a murderer, and Vane's got men in Silver Hollow who'll swear you did it cold, and they hang you, and he buys this ranch off your grave for nothing. Don't you see killing Vay is how Vane wins? That's the trap. The fire, the poison, the break, it was all to get the herd, but you putting a bullet in a man that gets him everything. Her voice cracked. Don't give it to him, Caleb. Please. We've got the evidence. We've got the poisoned barrel and the wrench he dropped, and I saw it with my own eyes, and I'll swear to it. We take it to the law clean. We beat him in the light, not in the dark, not with a gun. Please. Vay's horse was a sound fading down the mountain now. The window was closing. Clara felt Caleb's heart slamming under her palms, felt the whole shaking weight of him wanting to go, and she held him with nothing but her 2 hands and her words, and the one thing she had that Vane didn't. You're a better man than the dark Caleb Rourke, she said. You've been telling yourself you're hard since the day Ruth died. You're not hard. You're good. And a good man doesn't ride off and become a murderer because a coward made him afraid. Let him go. We'll get him the right way. I promise you. We'll get him. For 3 terrible heartbeats he didn't move. Then the rifle lowered. Get the powder off the wagon, he said hoarsely, and he turned away from the dark trail and the fading sound of Tom Vay, and he ran into the fire with his crew, and Clara stood 1 second with her hands still open in the air where his chest had been, and then she ran too. They fought the fire for an hour. The creek was low, but the crew was 8 strong and frightened, and they made a line, and they beat the corral rail black, and they hauled the powder kegs clear of the burning wagon one by one. Clara and Asa rolling them across the dirt, while the men beat the flames, and twice the fire jumped toward the barn, and twice they turned it. And when it was finally out, when there was nothing left but the smoking ruin of the supply wagon, and a black scar across the corral, and 8 exhausted soot-streaked people standing in the dark. Nobody spoke for a long while. Caleb walked to the wagon's remains. He stood over the cracked fire-split water barrel, and he crouched, and he dipped 2 fingers into what was left of the water, and he smelled it, and his whole face changed. Strychnine, he said. He stood up slow. There's strychnine in this water, enough to drop the whole crew and the horses both. He looked at the brake rod hanging loose and useless, and he understood the rest of it the way she'd understood it. And the brake. We'd have hit the Granby grade at first light. Wagon would have run away on the downslope, took the lead horses with it piled at the bottom, and the men riding drag would have been drinking from this barrel the whole climb up. His voice was flat and dead. It'd have looked just like an accident, just like the mountain, just like— He stopped. Just like Ruth. Asa finished quietly behind him, and the whole crew went still, because they all knew, every one of them knew, what the past meant to him, and they watched their hard, cold boss stand over the poisoned water in the dark, with the truth of it breaking over him that Vane had meant to murder him, the same way the mountain had murdered his sister, dressed up as bad luck, dressed up as the pass, doing what the pass did. That the one nightmare Caleb Rourke had organized his entire grieving life around a careless death on that crossing had been about to happen again on purpose to all of them. And Clara saw the thing land on him that she'd been afraid of since Asa first told her the story. She saw him start to go down under the weight of it. This is mine, Caleb said very low. I brought you all up here. I packed that wagon. I made the rules about the supplies, and I never once thought to guard 'em against a man already inside the gate. If she hadn't— He turned and looked at Clara, soot-streaked shaking still standing. If you hadn't come out here tonight, if you'd stayed in your kitchen like a sensible woman like I'd have told you to, like the rules say you stay to your kitchen, Whitfield, if you'd done what I told you— His voice broke. I'd have buried all of you, every one, at the wash, same as her, and I'd have lived, just like last time. I'd have been the one lived through it. Again. Caleb. How do I keep living through it? He said. And it wasn't to her, it wasn't to anyone, it was to the dark and the mountain and the grave on the rise. How does a man keep being the one that lives? And then Clara May Whitfield did the thing she'd been not doing for 3 weeks. She crossed the dark yard past the whole watching crew, and she took Caleb Rourke's big, sooty, shaking hand in both of hers, right there in front of all of them, breaking every unwritten rule between a hired cook and the man who hired her, and she held it. "You keep living," she said, "because the people who love you need you to. That's all. That's the whole reason. It's not a punishment that you lived, Caleb. It's not God picking you to suffer. You lived because this crew needs you, and this ranch needs you, and—" Her voice dropped. "And I need you. There. I said it in front of everybody, and I'm not taking it back. You lived because I needed you to still be here when I got up that mountain. So don't you dare stand over that barrel and wish you'd died with them. Don't you dare." The crew didn't make a sound. Caleb looked down at her hands holding his, and something came up out of him that none of them had ever seen. Not from Caleb Rourke. Not the coldest bachelor in the high country. His shoulders shook, and his breath went ragged, and a grown man who hadn't wept since 1879 stood in his own burned yard and wept silent. His hand crushed in the hands of a cook who'd arrived in the dirt of a road 3 weeks before with $1 and no place in the world to be. "All right," he said finally, Ruff wiping his face hard with his free hand. "All right." He looked up. The crew was watching. He didn't tell them to stop. "Asa, get a guard on what's left of that wagon in that barrel. Nobody touches it. That's evidence now. Hutch, you and Daniel ride the trail Vay took, see how far his tracks go. But you don't follow him off Rourke land, you hear me? You come back and you report. We do this clean." He drew a breath that steadied as it went. "First light, I ride to Silver Hollow for the sheriff. Clara comes with me to give her witness. We lay the whole of it out, the poison, the break, Vane, all of it in front of the law in the daylight where Vane can't twist it." He looked at her. "The right way, like you said." "The right way," Clara echoed, but old Asa, was frowning into the dark down the mountain where Vay had gone. "Caleb," he said slow. "Vay's riding straight to Vane right now, tonight. And Vane's gonna know it all went wrong the second Vay shows up with no dead crew and a story about a cook with a lantern. By the time you get down that mountain at first light—" The old man's jaw tightened. "Vane's gonna have his own version waiting for that sheriff. And Vane's got money, and Vane's got men who'll swear to anything, and you got a burned wagon, and a woman with no name in this county, and a hired hand who run off." He shook his head. "Vane'll get to the sheriff first. He always gets there first. That's how he's took half the valley." The hope that had just kindled in the yard guttered. "Then we ride tonight," Clara said. Everyone looked at her. "We don't wait for first light. We ride now, in the dark." She turned to Caleb. "You said you don't make the trail in the dark for anybody. I know, it's a rule. But Vane's racing us to the law right now, and the only way to beat a man to the truth is to get there before he can buy a lie. So we break the rule, Caleb. Tonight. We ride down that mountain in the dark, the two of us with the wrench and a sample of that poisoned water, and everything I saw, and we wake up that sheriff in the middle of the night, and we put the truth in his hands before Silas Vane ever gets his boots on." She held his eyes. "I know what I'm asking. I know what the dark trail means to you. But I'll be right beside you the whole way. And I'd rather ride a dark trail toward the truth than sleep safe and lose this ranch to a liar by morning." Caleb stared at her. The dark trail. The very thing. Ride the mountain at night the way you weren't ever supposed to, the way that got people killed, the way the pass had rided in the black with the one woman who'd already saved his whole crew toward a fight he might still lose. "You'd do that," he said. "Ride a night trail, for my ranch, for a man treated you like hired help and nailed rules to a wall and didn't say thank you for 3 weeks. It's not just your ranch anymore, Caleb." She didn't look away. "And you stopped being just a man who nailed rules to a wall a while back. You want me to say the rest of it out loud, in front of Asa and the whole crew." Her chin came up. "Because I will." And for the first time in 5 years, on the worst night of the second worst summer of his life, with his wagon burned and a murderer loose on his mountain, and everything he owned hanging by a thread. Caleb Rourke almost smiled. "Saddle 2 horses," he told Asa. "The sure-footed ones. Me and Clara are riding to town." He looked at her, and the thing in his eyes was so far from the cold dismissal he'd given her in the road 3 weeks ago that she could hardly believe it was the same man. "We're riding tonight. In the dark." A beat. "Don't make me regret it, Whitfield." "I never have yet," she said. They rode within the half hour. Asa caught her sleeve at the corral as Caleb checked the cinches, and he pressed something into her hand, a small folding knife, worn smooth with age. "You keep that close, ma'am," the old man said low. "I don't trust that trail, and I don't trust Vane, and I don't trust what's waiting at the bottom. Vay run that way. He might not run all the way home. You watch the dark." He glanced at Caleb, then back at her, and his old eyes were fierce. "And you watch him too. Not 'cause he'd hurt you. 'Cause that man'd ride straight into hell to keep you safe and forget all about keeping himself safe. Don't you let him. You bring him home, both of you. You hear me?" "I hear you, Asa." She closed her hand around the knife. "Clara." Caleb from the saddle. "Lights burning. We gotta beat Vane to that sheriff." She mounted. The horse shifted under her nervous in the dark, and Caleb leaned over and put his hand briefly over hers on the reins, steadying her. Steadying the horse, steadying maybe himself. "Stay close," he said. "Trail's narrow on the switchbacks. You follow my horse, and you don't look down. And you trust him to know the way, even when you can't see it. Can you do that?" "I've been doing exactly that since the day I got here," she said. "Following you down a road I can't see, and trusting you know the way. What's one more dark trail?" And something passed between them in the lantern light, quick and warm and terrifying to them both. And then Caleb clicked his tongue, and his horse stepped out toward the black mouth of the mountain trail, and Clara's horse followed, and the two of them rode down off the high meadow into the dark toward Silver Hollow. And the sheriff, and the truth, and somewhere ahead of them, on that same black mountain, Tom Vay had not in fact ridden all the way home. They were an hour down deep in the switchbacks where the timber closed black over the trail, and the horses picked their way by feel, when Caleb's horse threw its head up sharp and stopped, and Caleb's hand went up in the dark stop, and Clara reined in behind him, with her heart in her throat, and in the dead silence of the night mountain, they both heard it. The click of a gun being cocked somewhere in the black timber just ahead, and Tom Vay's voice, soft and cold and very close, came out of the dark. "Knew you'd come down tonight, Rourke," he said. "Knew she'd talk you into it. The smart ones always think the truth'll save 'em." A pause, and the awful smile was in his voice. "Vane figured you might not wait for mornin', so he had me wait for you instead. Don't move, neither of you," Vay said out of the black timber. "I can see you fine against the sky. You can't see me at all. That's the thing about waitin' in the dark. Rourke, you learn to love it." Caleb's voice came back level and slow. "You don't want to do this, Tom. I surely don't. But Vane pays for the doin', not the wantin'." The gun didn't waver. Clara could hear it in his voice, the steadiness of a man who'd settled something in himself. "Here's how it goes. You both turn them horses around and ride back up the mountain, and you forget you ever saw that wagon, and come fall, you sell to Vane like a sensible man and nobody dies tonight. Or, the click of the hammer easing back a hair further, you keep ridin' for that sheriff, and they find you both at the bottom of the wash come mornin'. Two folks rode a dark trail they had no business on. Such a shame. Just like the mountain done before." "You'd shoot a woman," Caleb said. "I'd shoot anybody Vane's payin' me to shoot." A pause. "But I'd start with you. 'Cause she can't ride this trail out alone in the dark, and she can't carry you, and by the time she figured what to do, she'd be crying too hard to think. So it's you first, Rourke, right now, unless you turn them horses." Clara's hand had found Asa's little folding knife in her coat pocket, useless against a gun in the dark. Her mind raced the timber, the drop on the downhill side, the narrow trail Vay, somewhere off to the left in the black where the bank rose. And one thing she knew, that Vay was counting on her not knowing that Caleb would die before he turned those horses, and that he was at this very second working out how to put his own body between the gun and her. She felt it in the dark. Felt him shift his weight in the saddle, slow, getting ready to drive his horse sideways into hers, to knock her off the downhill side into the brush and out of the line of fire and take the bullet himself doing it. "Caleb," she said. Quiet. Just his name. "Don't." "Whatever happens," he said back low, not to Vay to her, "you ride. You hear me. You don't stop for nothin'. You ride for the sheriff and you tell him everything." "Caleb, no." "Touchin'," Vay said. "Real touchin'. Now turn the horses or I start." And that was when the night behind Vay lit up. Not gunfire. Light a swinging lantern and a second one coming up the trail from below, and old Asa's voice rang out of the dark, loud as a church bell. "Tom Vay, that you up there in them rocks, it's Asa, and I got Hutch and Daniel and Caleb's rifle and 4 more lanterns coming up behind, and we can see you plain as day, boy, so you best think real hard about that gun. It was a bluff." Clara knew it the instant she heard it. Asa's voice was too steady, the lanterns too few. There was no army behind him, just an old man and 2 ranch hands who disobeyed the order to stay and had followed their boss down the mountain because they'd be damned if he rode into the dark alone. But Vay didn't know it. Vay was a hired killer alone in the timber, and the one thing a hired killer can't abide is light and witnesses, and suddenly there was both coming up the trail at his back. "Stay where you are, old man." Vay's voice cracked for the first time. The gun swung. Clara heard it swing, heard his attention split between the 2 on the trail and the lanterns climbing toward him. And in that 1/2 second of a divided man, Caleb moved. He came off his horse straight into the black timber, where Vay's voice was no gun, just 3 weeks of held grief, and 1 night of a burned wagon, and a woman he'd watched almost die, and Clara heard them go down together in the brush, heard the gun go off, once the muzzle flash, white pointed up, wild into the trees, and she was off her horse and running toward the sound. Before the echo died, the little knife open in her fist, Asa's lanterns bobbing up fast behind. She came on them in the lantern light just as Caleb got the gun. He had Vay under him in the dirt, 1 knee on the man's gun arm, and he'd torn the pistol loose and flung it down the slope into the dark. And now his big hands were closing around Tom Vay's throat and his face. Clara would remember his face the rest of her life. His face was the face of a man 5 years past his sister's grave. A man who'd been told just like the mountain done before a man with every reason in the world, and his thumbs finding the soft of a killer's windpipe. "Caleb!" Clara dropped to her knees beside them. She didn't grab his arms. She'd learned. She put her hand flat against his cheek, the way you'd gentle a spooked horse, and she turned his face toward hers in the lantern light. "Caleb, look at me. Not at him. At me." His hands didn't let go, but his eyes came to her. "This is the trap," she said softly. "Remember, this is what Vane wants. You kill him here in the dark, no witnesses but your own crew who'd lie for you, and Vane spins it into a hanging. But you don't kill him." Her thumb moved on his cheek. "You hand him to the law alive, and he talks, and he brings Vane down with him. A dead Vay can't testify Caleb. A live one can. That's how you win. That's how you bury Vane, not with your hands, with his words." She held his eyes. "Let go. Let him live so he can sink the man who sent him. Let go and come back to me." Say, for a long, terrible second, Caleb Rourke knelt over the man who'd tried to murder his whole world, and his hands stayed where they were. And Clara held his face, and held his eyes, and didn't blink. Then his hands opened. Tom Vay rolled away coughing and gagging in the dirt, and Hutch and Daniel were on him in an instant, hauling his arms back, and Asa stood over them with the lantern held high, and the rifle in his old hands pointed steady at Vay's heaving chest. "You disobeyed me," Caleb said hoarsely, still on his knees. He wasn't looking at Vay. He was looking at Asa. "I told you all to stay. You did." Asa didn't lower the rifle. "And in 31 years, it's the first order of yours I ever broke, and I'd break it again. You think I'd let you ride a black mountain alone with a killer loose on it? After everything?" The old man's voice shook. "We're your crew, Caleb. Not your hired men. Your crew. We've been waiting 5 years for you to figure out the difference. Looks like it took her to teach it to you." He nodded at Clara, and Caleb Rourke knelt in the dirt of a dark mountain trail and looked at the old man who'd followed him into the night, and the 2 ranch hands holding down the killer, and the woman whose hand was still on his face, and Clara watched the last of the wall come down inside him. The wall he'd built, one rule at a time, around a heart that had decided 5 years ago it didn't deserve to be loved. "All right," he said. He got to his feet slow. He held a hand down to Clara and pulled her up out of the dirt, and he did not let go of her hand. "Asa, tie him to a horse. We're all of us riding to Silver Hollow tonight. The whole crew. And we're going to stand in that sheriff's office together, every one of us. And we're going to tell the truth so loud and so many times that Silas Vane can't buy enough lies to bury it." He looked down at Vay, gasping in the dirt. "And you, Tom, you got one chance to ride down off this gallows you built yourself. You tell that sheriff who paid you. You tell him all of it, or you hang alone for what Vane sent you to do while Vane sleeps easy in his big house in the valley. Your choice, but you make it before sunup. Yeah. They rode into Silver Hollow as the first gray came up behind the eastern peaks. The whole crew, 8 strong, with Tom Vay tied wrist and ankle on a LED horse and the broken brake rod and the wrench and a corked jar of poisoned water wrapped careful in Clara's shawl. They woke the sheriff, a heavy slow man named Burnett, who'd known Caleb's father, and they crowded into his little office in the dawn, and Clara laid it all out clear and plain and unshaking, the way she'd laid out 1,000 suppers, every fact in its place, and nothing wasted. And then Silas Vane's wagon came up the street. He'd ridden through the night, too. Of course he had. Asa had been right. Vane always got there first, or near enough. He came into the sheriff's office in his good coat, with his soft smile, and 2 of his hired men behind him, and he had his story already built smooth as a river stone. "Sheriff Burnett." Vane spread his hands. "I come the second I heard. Terrible thing. Rourke's man Vay rode to my place in the night, half out of his mind, saying Rourke had gone wild, burned his own wagon. Beat a hand near to death, dragged the poor soul off across the mountain. I told Vay to stay put, and I come straight to you. The man's grief-mad Burnett. Has been since his sister. Everybody in this county knows it. I've been trying to buy that ranch off him for his own good. Get him down off that mountain before he hurts somebody, and now look." "He's lying," Clara said. Vane's smile flicked to her. "And who's this?" "The Cheyenne woman. The thief he hired off a coach. Now there's a reliable witness. I never stole a thing in my life, Mr. Vane, and you know it, because the man who told you I did is the same man you paid to lie about everything else." Clara stepped forward, and she did not raise her voice, and somehow that was worse. "You want to know how I know you're lying? You said Tom Vay rode to your place last night, and you told him to stay put, and you came straight here." She let it sit. "But the sheriff hasn't said one word yet about Tom Vay being here. Nobody's told you we brought him. Nobody's told you he's alive and tied up in the next room. So how is it, Mr. Vane, that you came down off your mountain with a story all about a man you couldn't have known we caught?" She turned to the sheriff. "He built that story to explain a dead crew and a ruined Rourke. He didn't build it for a live Tom Vay sitting in your jail ready to talk. Ask him why his story's already got holes in it before sunup." The office went dead silent. Sheriff Burnett, slow and heavy, looked from Clara to Vane, and something moved behind his tired eyes. "That's true, Silas," Burnett said slowly. "I ain't said nothing about Vay being here. And you come in talking like you already knew the shape of the whole night." He scratched his jaw. "How'd you know to come?" Vane's smile slipped. "Just a hair. Vay told me when he rode to my place." "Vay rode straight from the Rourke place to lay an ambush on the mountain trail," Caleb said. "He never went near your place, Vane. We caught him in the timber waiting for us with a cocked gun 2 hours before you say he showed up at your door. Asa saw it. Hutch saw it. Daniel saw it. 6 of my crew saw it. You want to bring all 6 in here and ask 'em. "And there's the brake rod he loosened," Clara said, setting it on Burnett's desk. "And the wrench he dropped with his initials, filed in the handle, see them there. And this," she set down the jar strychnine out of the trail water barrel he poured it into. "Send for Doc Hollis. He'll tell you what's in it. A whole crew and a string of horses dead on the pass, dressed up to look like the mountain did it. Same as it did Ruth Rourke 5 years back." Her voice didn't shake. Only this time, there was a witness, Mr. Vane. "This time, I was standing in the dark, holding a lantern when your man poured the poison. And I'll swear to all of it in front of a circuit judge with my hand on a Bible as many times as the law wants to hear it." Vane's face had gone the color of tallow. "Burnett," he said, and the smile was gone now, all gone. "You're not going to take the word of a coach thief and a madman over Tom." Sheriff Burnett called toward the back room, not loud. "Tom Vay, you hear all this?" A silence. Then Vay's voice, ragged from where Caleb's hands had been. "I hear it. You want to hang alone for it, son. While Silas walks out my door, free as a bird." Burnett's voice was almost gentle. "Or you want to tell me who paid you and how much and when, and let a judge decide what that's worth come trial." The longest silence yet. And then from the back room, Tom Vay began to talk. He told it all. The strychnine Vane had given him in a tin, the price $100, and a job on Vane's spread after the orders to make it look like the mountain. The orders that came after Caleb said no to the offer, especially the orders that came after, if he won't sell, then the herd dies, and we buy the ranch off the ruin. He told it flat and bitter and complete, a drowning man, pulling the one who'd pushed him down into the water alongside. And with every word Silas Vane got smaller in his good coat, and his 2 hired men edged toward the door, and Sheriff Burnett got slowly, heavily to his feet. "Silas Vane," Burnett said, "I'm holding you. Attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, and I expect we'll find more once the circuit judge gets up here and we start pulling on the threads. You and your boys put your hands where I can see 'em. This is," Vane's voice climbed, "this is the word of a paid liar and a thief and a man half mad with grief. You can't. Burnett, you've known me 20 years. I've known you 20 years, Burnett agreed heavily. "And in 20 years, I watched you take half this valley off folks too poor or too scared or too dead to fight you, and I told myself there weren't never proof. Well." He nodded at the desk, the brake rod, the jar, the wrench. "There's proof now. And there's a woman willing to swear to it, and a crew of 8 backs her and your own man singing in my back room." He took out the irons. 20 years, Silas. It was a long time coming. Hands." They took Silas Vane out of the office in irons as the sun cleared the eastern peaks and the whole town of Silver Hollow came out onto the boardwalks, to watch at the same boardwalks where 3 weeks before they'd stood and laughed while a woman knelt in the dirt of their street. They watched in silence now. And when the sheriff's man led Vane down toward the jail, Clara felt the eyes of the town swing to her, and she braced for the old hardness, the whispers, the Cheyenne woman, the thief. But it didn't come. A woman stepped down off the mercantile porch, the same sharp-voiced woman who'd watched Clara kneel in the road and not come down. She came across the street, and she stopped in front of Clara, and she said, stiff and awkward, and 3 weeks too late, "I was on that porch the day you come. The day the coach put you out." She swallowed. "I didn't come down. I should have come down. A whole street of us should have come down, and not one of us did, and we let them men say what they said about you." She looked at her hands. "And you turned right around and saved this whole valley from Silas Vane anyhow." I'm ashamed, miss. That's all. I just come to say, I'm ashamed and I'm sorry. And there's a hot breakfast at my table whenever you want it, you and the whole Rourke crew on the house, for as long as I'm alive to cook it." And Clara May Whitfield, who'd ridden a dark mountain all night and faced down a gun and a killer and the richest man in the county, felt her composure crack at last, not at the threat, not at the danger, but at the simple, unexpected kindness of an apology she'd never thought she'd hear. "Thank you," she managed. We'd be glad of it." But it was Caleb who undid her completely. He'd been standing back, letting her have the moment the way she'd let him have his. Now he stepped forward into the middle of the street, into the dust where she'd knelt 3 weeks before, and he took off his hat. Caleb Rourke, who didn't tip his hat to anyone, and he held it against his chest, and he raised his voice so the whole gathered town could hear him. This man who never raised his voice, who'd said maybe 400 words in the 3 weeks she'd known him. 3 weeks ago, Caleb said loud to the street, this town stood on these boards and watched a coach throw this woman in the dirt, and not one of you lifted a hand, and I rode in, and I was no better. I read her letter, and I told her one mistake, and she's gone, and I treated her like hired help, and a burden for near a month while she fed my crew and mended my fences, and... His voice caught, and he pushed through it, and saved every life on my ranch, including my own miserable life that I ain't valued right since the day I buried my sister. He turned and looked at Clara, and the whole town turned with him. And I've been a coward about saying the rest of it, so I'll say it here, in the same street that threw you down, in front of all of them. Caleb, Clara's voice was barely there. Clara May Whitfield. He crossed to her, hat in hand. You broke about every rule I ever nailed to a wall. You held supper 4 minutes the first night. You brought me my plate to a room I told you never to go near. You spoke for me to my enemy in my own yard. You broke the rule about the dark trail. You broke the rule about my sister. His eyes were wet, and he didn't hide it, not from her, not from the town. Every rule I made out of fear. The night Ruth died rules, so nothing could ever hurt me like that again. I built a cage and I called it a ranch, and I locked myself in it for 5 years. And you? His voice broke clean. You walked in, and you broke every bar of it one at a time, and you didn't even ask my leave. And it's the best thing that ever happened to me. The rules kept me safe, and they kept me dead. You broke 'em, and I'm alive, so I'm done with rules, Clara. I'm done being safe. I'd rather be alive and afraid with you than safe and dead without you. The street had gone utterly silent. Even the sheriff had stopped. I ain't asking you to stay on as my cook, Caleb said low now, just barely loud enough the hat crushed in his 2 hands. I'm asking you to stay because the ranch stopped feeling empty the day you dared to disobey me. I'm asking you to stay because I don't know how to be alive without you anymore, and I don't want to learn. I'm asking... He stopped, gathered it. I'm asking you to stay, Clara, not as help, as mine. If you'll have a hard, cold fool who took 3 weeks in a burned wagon to learn how to say thank you. And Clara May Whitfield stood in the dust of the street that had thrown her down with the whole town, watching, and the man she'd followed, down a road she couldn't see now, standing in front of her with his hat in his hands, and his whole broken open heart in his eyes. And she did the only thing that had ever made sense since the moment his shadow first fell across her in this very street. She stepped forward and put her hand against his cheek, the way she had in the dark, the way she had over a poisoned barrel, and she said loud enough for the town, and soft enough for only him. I told you the first night, Caleb Rourke. I'm not going anywhere. Not down that mountain, not out of that kitchen, and now, not out of your arms either. Her thumb moved on his face. I'll have you. Hard and cold and 3 weeks slow. I'll have you. I've been wanting to since you knelt down in this same dirt and folded my mother's sewing tin into my bag like it mattered. Her voice broke at last. You want to know the truth? That's the moment. Right there, 3 weeks ago. That's the moment I was yours. And Caleb Rourke dropped his hat in the street and pulled her in, and the town of Silver Hollow, that had once laughed at a woman in the dirt, now stood in silence, and watched the coldest bachelor in the high country hold on to her like a man who'd come up out of deep water. And old Asa took off his own hat and wiped his eyes and said to nobody to everybody, 5 years, 5 years I waited to see that. God bless the woman. God bless her. They rode back up the mountain together that afternoon. The whole crew strung out along the trail in the high summer light, and the drought broke 3 days later. It came the way the mountain gives things back all at once, a wall of gray over the western peaks, and then rain, real rain. 2 days of it drumming the roofs and filling the creek and bringing the brittle meadow grass back green from the root. Caleb stood on the cookhouse porch the first night of it with his coffee going cold in his hand, watching the water come down, and Clara came and stood beside him, and neither of them said anything for a long while. "The grass'll hold now," he said finally. "Cattle can wait for the proper season. We don't have to run the pass in the dry no more." He turned his cup slow in his hands. "5 years I've been afraid of that crossin'. And this summer it like to killed us all over again, just like I always knew it would." He looked at her. "But it weren't the pass that almost done it, Clara. It was a man. Vane. The pass never killed nobody. The pass is just rockin' weather. It was carelessness took Ruth, and it was greed sent Vay, and I spent 5 years blamin' a mountain for what people done." He shook his head slow. "I built all them rules against the wrong thing. You built them against losing someone," Clara said quietly. "That's not the wrong thing to be afraid of, Caleb. You just built the walls so high you couldn't let anyone close enough to be worth losing." She slipped her hand into his. "There's no rule keeps you from grief. The only thing that keeps out grief is keeping out love, and you tried that, and look how alive it made you." He was quiet a moment. "You always talk like that, like a preacher and a cook had a child. Only to fools who need it spelled out twice." But she was smiling, and he heard it, and his thumb moved over her knuckles in the rainlight. The trial came in August, when the circuit judge made his round through Silver Hollow. Clara stood up in this crowded little courthouse, with her hand on the Bible, and told it all again, plain and unshaking. And Tom Vay told his part, and the brake rod, and the wrench, and Doc Hollis's report on the strychnine in the water, all sat on the table where the jury could see them. And Silas Vane's smooth river stone story came apart in the daylight exactly the way Clara had said it would. Half the valley turned out folks. Vane had cheated folks too scared to speak before, who found their nerve now that someone else had spoken first. An old widow whose husband had signed away their bottomland under threat. A homesteader who'd been run off his claim by Vane's hired men. One after another they stood up, and the thing Vane had built on 20 years of fear came down in a single afternoon, brick by brick, on the words of the people he'd thought too small to matter. The judge gave Vane 20 years. Tom Vay, for turning for testifying, got 5. And as they led Silas Vane out of the courthouse in irons for the last time, he stopped in front of Clara, the way he had that first dawn. And his soft, heavy face was older now, and beaten, and he looked at her with something that wasn't quite hatred anymore. Just bafflement. "A cook," he said. 20 years I built that, and a cook took it down." "How?" "Because you spent 20 years counting what people had, Mr. Vane," Clara said. "And you never once counted what they were worth." She didn't say it cruel. She said it almost gentle. "You looked at a woman in the dirt and saw something to use." He looked at the same woman and knelt down and folded her things back in her bag. "That's the whole difference between you. That's how." And they took Silas Vane away, and the people he'd cheated for 20 years stood on the courthouse steps in the summer sun and watched him go, and somebody started to clap. And then they all did. And Clara stood in the middle of it, not knowing what to do with her hands, until Caleb put his arm around her, and she didn't have to know. They were married in September in the Silver Hollow Church by the same preacher who'd buried Ruth. The whole valley came. The sharp-voiced mercantile woman cooked the wedding supper and wouldn't take a cent for it. Asa gave the bride away. She'd asked him, and the old man had cried so hard at the asking he couldn't answer for a full minute, and just nodded and gripped her hands. The crew cleaned up so fine she barely knew them. And Caleb Rourke, who didn't smile, stood at the front of that church and watched Clara come down the aisle on Asa's arm, and he smiled so wide and so helpless that old Hutch leaned over to Daniel and whispered, Is the boss cryin'?" And Daniel whispered back, "Shut up, Hutch, so am I." But the thing Clara remembered most about that whole golden autumn wasn't the trial, or the wedding, or the rain breaking the drought. It was the morning Caleb opened the west room. It was a week before the wedding. She came into the kitchen before light to start the coffee, the way she always would, and she found him already up, standing in the open doorway of Ruth's room, with a lamp in his hand, and his back to her. And the door. The door she'd been forbidden to touch the door. She'd set his supper outside of and never once opened. The door stood wide. She didn't go in, even now. She stopped in the kitchen and waited. "Come here," he said, not turning around. "I want you to see her." And Clara crossed the kitchen and came to stand beside him in the doorway, and she looked into the small, careful room that a grieving man had kept like a held breath for 5 years. A girl's room, a narrow bed made up neat, a window that faced the rise and the headstone, and the past beyond a few small things on a shelf, a hairbrush, a dried flower gone to dust, a sampler half-stitched and never finished. She was 16, Caleb said. She was stitching that the spring before, never got to finish it. His voice was steady. That was the thing that undid Clara, that he could say it steady now. I kept it all just so. 5 years. Couldn't go in some weeks. Couldn't stay out others. I'd sit in here in the dark and tell her I was sorry till the sun come up. He set the lamp down. I always figured I'd keep it like this till I died. A little tomb in the middle of my house. Punishin' myself proper. Caleb, Clara's hand found his. But I been thinkin'. He turned to her at last, and his eyes were wet and clear both at once. Ruth weren't a punishment. She were a joy. 16 years of pure joy, and then a accident, a terrible accident, and I been honorin' her by buildin' a tomb and shuttin' out the light, and that ain't honorin' her at all. She'd hate it. She'd purely hate it. A breath. She loved a full house, loved noise and flowers, and folks comin' and goin', and I made her room into the quietest, emptiest, deadest place on the whole ranch. He shook his head. That ain't her. That's just my guilt wearin' her name. What do you want to do? Clara asked softly. I want to make it a living room again. He looked at her. I want it to be yours. You're sewing your herbs dryin' in the window, your needles and your threads. You're a seamstress, Clara, a real one before all this, and you've been making do at the kitchen table. I want you to have a room with good light, and I want it to be this room. I want Ruth's window full of your work and your hummin', and the door standin' open and the light comin' in. His voice caught. I think she'd like that. I think she'd like there being a seamstress in her room again making beautiful things. I think it's the first thing I've wanted to do in 5 years that she'd actually be glad of. And Clara May Whitfield, who had learned the shape of this man, by walking the length of his walls in the dark, watched the last wall come down, not knocked down, not broken, but opened from the inside by his own hand at last. I'd be honored, she said. I'd be so honored, Caleb. And we'll keep her sampler. We'll hang it right there in the good light where everyone can see it finished or not. And when folks ask, you'll tell them about her, out loud, the way you just told me. She squeezed his hand. That's how you keep someone, Caleb. Not in a locked room, in the light where you can say their name. He nodded, and he couldn't speak, and he didn't have to. So that was Clara's room, after that. Ruth's room, the West room, the forbidden room, made over into a place of color and thread, and the good morning light with a 16-year-old girl's half-finished sampler hung where the sun would find it every day. Clara took in mending and sewing for half the valley out of that room, and the women who came to be fitted would sit by the window and Caleb would tell them easy. Now, that's my sister, Ruth Stitchin. She didn't get to finish it, and he'd say her name out loud the way Clara had taught him, and it didn't break him anymore. It steadied him, the way saying a name in the light always does. The rules came down off the kitchen wall. He did it himself the morning after the wedding, while Clara watched from the doorway with her coffee. He pried out the nails one by one and stacked the little hand-lettered boards, and when they were all down, he stood looking at the bare wall a long moment. Don't seem right just to burn 'em, he said. They got me through. Bad as they was, they got me through 5 years I might not have otherwise. Then don't burn them. Clara came and stood beside him. Keep them. Put them up in the barn loft. Not because you'll ever live by them again, but so that someday, when this is all so far behind us, we can barely remember it. You can climb up there and look at them and know how far you came. She smiled. A man ought to keep the chains he broke out of, so he never forgets he was strong enough to break them. So the rules went up to the barn loft in a wooden box, and the kitchen wall stayed bare, and Clara hung a window curtain there instead. The first curtain that house had seen in 5 years, gingham blue and white, and the morning light came through it soft. And she planted sunflowers. She'd been wanting to since the first week the sorry overgrown garden some other woman had set and abandoned that Clara had weeded and never quite known what to do with. She put sunflowers all along the porch rail that next spring, a whole bright row of them, and they came up tall and turned their heavy gold faces to follow the summer sun. And Caleb came in from the work one evening and stopped dead in the yard at the sight of them. "What?" Clara said, watching his face. "My mother grew sunflowers." He said it strange quiet. "I forgot. I plumb forgot till just now. Right along that same rail. Before the bad winter took her and Pa. I was little. I forgot we ever had anything growing here." He looked at the bright row of them at the porch that had been bare and hard and flowerless the day she came, and something moved over his sun-browned face that she'd never seen there. Not grief, not the old guilt, but a kind of homecoming. "You brought 'em back," he said. "You didn't even know, and you brought 'em right back to the same rail. Ditterbat." "Then they were always meant to be there," Clara said. "I just planted them late." The first time he asked her to ride the ranch with him, not as cook, not behind a wagon, but beside him on her own horse. His equal across the whole of his land was a morning. The next summer, a full year, passed the dust of that first terrible day. He'd traded for a gentle mare for her and put her own saddle on it, and he led it to the porch where she stood in the sunflowers, and he held the bridle out. "I been thinkin'," he said. "A cook keeps the kitchen, a wife keeps the house, but you ain't either of those, not really, never were. You keep the whole of it. The crew, the books, the mendin', the sense of the place. You been running half this ranch from a kitchen for a year and letting me think it was mine." He held out the bridle. "So I want you to see it, all of it, beside me. Not the cook, not the help, not even the wife exactly. The other half of the Rourke place. 'Cause that's what you are, Clara, and I want you knowin' the whole of what you saved." And Clara May Whitfield, who'd come up that mountain with $1 and a dented sewing tin, and no place in the whole world to be, took the bridle from the hand of the man who'd once told her one mistake, "And you're gone." And she swung up into her own saddle, and they rode out together across the green high meadow in the summer light, the creek running full and cold, the cattle fat on the recovered grass, the sunflowers nodding behind them on the porch rail, and the open window of a room that used to be a tomb catching the morning sun. They stopped on the rise behind the house where the headstone was, where you could see the pass. Caleb got down. He took his hat off. And he stood over his sister's grave with his wife beside him, and he didn't apologize this time. He'd done all his apologizing. He just said, quiet, "Ruth, this here's Clara. She's the one broke all my rules. You'd have liked her. She's in your room now, making it pretty, filling your window up with color, and I say your name out loud now, baby sister. Every day. The way I should have all along." He put his hat back on. "We're all right up here now. Finally. We're all right." Then he took Clara's hand, and they rode back down the rise toward the house, toward the crew and the sunflowers, and the bare kitchen wall, and the open door of the room full of light. And the morning was so clear you could see clean to the pass that had haunted him half his life, and it was just rock and summer weather now. Just a mountain. Nothing to fear in it at all. Clara May Whitfield had arrived in the dirt of a street with everyone watching her fall, and no one moving to help. A year and some later, she rode the high meadow of a mountain ranch as its equal heart, beside a man who'd learned at last that the person who breaks your rules can be the very one who saves your life. That love is not perfect obedience and never was, but trust and courage, and the willingness to be changed by someone brave enough to break down your walls and brave enough to stay once they're down. And she never once looked back down that mountain road. There was nothing back there for her. Everything she'd ever wanted she'd found at the top of the climb, and from that morning on in the warm gold of every high country summer that followed the Rourke Ranch was never cold, and never silent, and never empty again.